A plus-size bakery woman pulled a stranger out of a crashed car during a blizzard. She had no idea he was a mafia boss running from people inside his own organization. By the next morning, her quiet mountain cabin had 3 armed convoys parked outside. What happened after that, nobody saw coming. The last tray of sourdough came out of the oven at 6:47 in the evening. Emma wiped her hands on her apron, checked the window, and felt her stomach drop. The snow was coming down sideways. She had lived in the Colorado mountains her whole life. But this one looked different. The kind of storm that didn't care about your plans. The kind that buried cars overnight and left people stranded for days. She turned off the bakery lights, locked the front door, and pulled her coat tight before stepping outside. The cold hit her face like a wall. Her old truck sat in the lot, already wearing 2 inches of white on the hood. She brushed it off, started the engine, and pulled slowly onto the mountain road. The drive home was only 4 miles. On a normal evening, it took 8 minutes. Tonight, she gave herself 30. The wipers worked hard against the windshield. The road ahead disappeared into white every few seconds. Emma drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, breathing steady. She almost missed it. About 1.5 miles from the cabin, something dark caught her eye just off the road. She slowed down, squinted through the snow and saw it. A black SUV, nose first into the shallow ditch along the tree line. The hazard lights were still blinking weakly through the storm. Emma stopped the truck. She sat there for a moment. Part of her said, "Keep driving. The roads were getting dangerous." She had maybe 20 minutes before visibility dropped to nothing. But those blinking lights meant someone was still inside. She pulled on her gloves, grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, and climbed out. The wind nearly knocked her sideways. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed the road and made her way toward the SUV. She shone the light through the driver's window and saw him, a man, sitting in the driver's seat, head resting against the side window, eyes half open. He looked maybe 40, dark hair, pale face. His left hand was pressed against his ribs, and even through the glass, Emma could see he was struggling. She tapped the window. His eyes moved toward her slowly. She pulled the door handle, locked. She knocked again and pointed down toward the lock. He reached up with effort and clicked it open. The door swung wide. Cold air rushed in. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He looked at her for a second like he was trying to remember where he was. "Ribs," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but his face told a different story. "I think one might be cracked." "Can you walk?" "If I have to, you have to," Emma said. "I'm not strong enough to carry you, and my truck is right across the road." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close to it. He gripped the doorframe with one hand and pushed himself upright. She stepped back to give him room. He climbed out slowly, jaw tight, and stood in the snow. He was tall, much taller than she expected, and he was wearing the wrong coat for this weather. A long wool coat, not waterproof, already soaked through at the shoulders. "Where did you come from?" she asked, taking his arm to steady him. "Denver," he said. "Took the mountain route. The GPS said it was faster. In this storm, I didn't know it was going to be this bad." Emma shook her head and helped him toward the truck. They crossed the road carefully. She got him into the passenger seat, closed the door, and went around to the driver's side. When she climbed in, she could hear his breathing, careful, measured, like every breath was a small negotiation with pain. "I'm Emma," she said. "Daniel," he said. "Is there anyone I can call for you, Daniel?" He was quiet for a moment. "No signal out here. I have a landline at the cabin." Another pause. "I'll handle it myself. Once we're somewhere warm." Emma didn't push. She pulled back onto the road and drove the last 1.5 miles in silence. The cabin was small but well kept. She got him inside, got the fireplace going, and found the old first aid kit under the kitchen sink. He sat at the table while she checked the bruising along his left side. She had done a wilderness first aid course years ago, enough to know what to look for. "Nothing's displaced," she said. "Probably a bruise, maybe a hairline crack. Either way, you're not going anywhere tonight." He nodded slowly. She made soup. He ate quietly. The fire popped and settled. Then his phone buzzed. He had found signal somehow. Maybe the cabin sat in a pocket where the towers reached. He glanced at the screen, and she watched his face change completely. Whatever easy stillness had settled over him in the last hour vanished. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat and focused in a way that made Emma pause mid-step across the kitchen. He typed a short reply, set the phone face down on the table, and looked at the wall for a moment. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said. But it wasn't fine. She could see that clearly. She went back to stirring the soup. She told herself it wasn't her business. He was a stranger. She had done the right thing bringing him in from the storm, and that was enough. She almost believed it. Until she heard him type another message and caught 3 words on the screen before the phone went dark. "They found us." Emma set the ladle down quietly. Outside, the blizzard screamed against the windows. Inside, the air in the small cabin had shifted into something she couldn't name. She didn't know who Daniel Brooks was. She didn't know what those 3 words meant. But something in her gut told her that the storm outside was the least dangerous thing in the room. Morning came gray and heavy. Emma woke before sunrise, which was normal for her. Years of early bakery shifts had rewired her body clock in a way she had long stopped fighting. She lay still for a moment, listening. The wind had dropped overnight, but the snow was still falling. Quieter now, steady, the kind that piled up without drama. She pulled on her robe and padded out to the main room. Daniel was already awake. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him, not looking at it, just sitting. The fire had burned down to coals and the room was cool. He had his wool coat draped over his shoulders like a blanket. He looked like a man who hadn't slept at all, but wasn't going to admit it. Emma went straight to the fireplace and added 2 logs without saying anything. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. She got the coffee going and cracked eggs into a pan. He watched her move around the small kitchen, with the quiet attention of someone used to studying people. She noticed it but said nothing. When the food was ready, she set a plate in front of him and sat across the table with her own. "Roads will be closed until tomorrow at the earliest," she said. "I checked the radio." He nodded like he already knew. "You're welcome to stay," she added. "There's a spare room. It's not much, but the bed is decent." He looked at her for a moment. "I don't want to put you in a difficult position." "You're a man with cracked ribs sitting in a snowstorm," Emma said. "You're already in a difficult position. Eat your eggs." He ate. After breakfast, she gave him a dry flannel shirt that had belonged to her father and pointed him toward the bathroom. While he cleaned up, she fed the chickens in the small coop out back, checked that the firewood pile under the porch cover was holding, and shoveled a path to the front door. By mid-morning, the cabin had warmed up properly. Daniel came out of the spare room looking more human than the night before. His color was better. He moved carefully but steadily. He found her reorganizing the pantry shelf, and without asking he started helping, handing her jars from the lower shelf that she had to bend awkwardly to reach. "You don't need to do that either," she said. "I know," he said, echoing her words from earlier. She smiled in spite of herself. They worked quietly together for a while. Then he started on the pile of firewood by the side door, restacking it the way she had been meaning to do all week so the pieces dried more evenly. She watched him from the kitchen window. He worked slowly because of his ribs, but he worked carefully, and he didn't stop until it was done. Around noon, she noticed his watch when he reached across the table for the salt shaker. She hadn't paid attention to it the night before. Now she did. It was the kind of watch that didn't advertise itself loudly but cost more than her truck. The face was clean and dark. The band was dark leather, slightly worn. The kind of worn that comes from actually wearing something expensive every day rather than saving it. She said nothing, but she started paying attention. His phone buzzed several times through the afternoon. Each time it did, he stepped outside onto the porch to answer despite the cold. She could hear pieces of the conversations through the kitchen window when she was near. It not words exactly, just tone, and the tone was always the same. Whoever was calling him spoke carefully, precisely, the way people speak when they are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Not the way you talk to a colleague, the way you talk to someone who has power over you. Late in the afternoon, he came inside from one of those calls and stood by the fire for a while, warming his hands. Emma was at the table writing out a supply list. She had been adding to it all day as she took stock of what the storm might hold them through. "What's the bakery called?" he asked suddenly. She looked up. "Clover and Crumb. How long have you had it?" 4 years. I leased the space. Have since I was 26. You want to own it eventually? She put her pen down. I want to own the whole building eventually. There's a property 2 doors down from it that would be perfect for expansion. A proper cafe side with seating, maybe a small event space in the back. She paused. That's a lot of eventually, though. He looked at the fire. What's stopping you? Money, she said simply. What stops most things? He nodded slowly. Not the polite nod of someone pretending to understand. Something more genuine than that. And you? She asked. What do you do? Daniel? The question sat in the air between them. He took a breath, slow and measured like every breath he took. Then he said, I manage several business interests across different states. What kind of businesses? Various. Emma held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her list. Various. It was not an answer. It was a door closed quietly in her face. She had grown up around enough mountain men with complicated histories to know when someone was choosing words instead of speaking them. She picked up her pen. Outside, the snow kept falling. The fire settled. The cabin held its warmth. But that door Daniel had just closed quietly in her face. Something told her it opened onto a room she wasn't ready for. The storm broke sometime before dawn. Emma knew it before she even opened her eyes. The cabin had a different sound to it. Or rather, the absence of sound. No wind pressing against the walls. No snow ticking against the glass. Just stillness. The deep quiet that follows a big storm like an exhale. She got up, made coffee, and stood at the front window with her mug. The mountains were white and clean and almost painfully beautiful in the early light. The road was buried but visible. Somewhere down the valley, she could hear the distant sound of a plow working its way up the main route. By afternoon, the roads would be passable. She turned to check on Daniel and found his bedroom door already open. The spare room was empty, the bed neatly made. She went to the kitchen and found a short note on the table written on the back of her supply list. Thank you. I mean that. Emma stood there holding the note for a moment. Then she heard the vehicles. It started as a low hum, distant, the kind of sound that didn't belong on a mountain road at 7 in the morning. She went to the front window and watched 3 black SUVs roll up the cleared path toward the cabin in a tight convoy. Expensive. Clean despite the snow. Moving with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having done this before. She set her mug down. Daniel appeared from the side of the cabin. He had been outside already, standing in the cold, watching the road. When the first SUV stopped, he walked toward it steadily, hands relaxed at his sides, ribs clearly still bothering him, but his posture straight. The passenger door of the lead vehicle opened before it fully stopped. A man stepped out fast, mid-30s, broad shoulders, short dark hair, sharp eyes that swept the property in one practiced motion before landing on Daniel. He crossed the snow in 3 strides and clasped Daniel's hand, then gripped his shoulder carefully, checking him over the way you check someone you were genuinely afraid of losing. You had us looking all night, the man said. I'm fine, Ryan, Daniel said. Behind Ryan, doors were opening. 4 other men climbed out from the remaining vehicles, all of them moving with the same quiet discipline. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody rushed. They positioned themselves with a naturalness that looked casual, until you realized it wasn't casual at all. Emma had come to the front porch without fully deciding to. Ryan noticed her immediately. His eyes moved to Daniel. Daniel turned and looked at Emma. Something shifted in his expression. A brief conflict there and gone in a second. Then he walked back toward the porch. "Emma," he said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "There are some things I should explain." "Probably," she said. Ryan had followed him and now stood slightly behind and to the left, close enough to be part of the conversation, far enough to be watching everything else at the same time. "Ryan," Daniel said, "give us a minute." Ryan looked at Emma once more, then nodded and stepped away toward the vehicles. Daniel climbed the 2 porch steps and stood in front of her. In the gray morning light, without the warmth of the cabin between them, he looked different. Harder somehow, like the 2 days inside had been a temporary softening and the cold air had returned him to his actual shape. "How bad is it?" Emma asked quietly. He almost looked surprised that she led with that. "The organization I run," he began, "is not legitimate. It operates across several states. I won't explain everything because most of it isn't something you need to know. But I want you to understand that you helped someone whose name carries serious weight in certain circles." Emma leaned against the porch railing and crossed her arms. "How serious?" He held her gaze. "Serious enough that when those messages came through the other night, it meant people inside my own operation were trying to locate me before I wanted to be found." She took that in. "Why were they looking for you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "Because I've been gathering evidence against them." Emma blinked. "Against your own people?" "They stopped being my people a long time ago," Daniel said. "They've been running operations under my name that I never approved. Taking money, hurting people I told them were off limits. I've been building a case quietly for 8 months. When they figured out something was happening, they started looking for me." Emma stared at him. "You're trying to dismantle your own organization," she said slowly. "The parts of it that can't be fixed, yes." Down by the SUVs, Ryan was on a phone call. The other men stood at practiced distances, patient and still in the cold morning air. Emma looked at Daniel for a long moment. The man who had eaten her eggs and restacked her firewood and written 2 lines of thanks on the back of a grocery list. "You could have told me," she said. "Would you have believed me 2 days ago?" She thought about it honestly. "No, that's why I didn't." A long silence settled between them. Somewhere down the mountain, the plow kept working. A bird crossed the white sky above the tree line. Emma pushed off the railing and picked up her coffee mug from the windowsill where she had set it. "Down, come inside," she said. "Your people can wait 10 minutes. You haven't eaten breakfast." Daniel looked at her. Then, for the first time in 3 days, he almost smiled. Denver looked different after 4 days in the mountains. Emma had driven down the same afternoon the roads cleared, following the convoy at a distance in her old truck, because Daniel had asked her to meet him once more before everything moved forward. She hadn't fully understood why she agreed. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the fact that his story had lodged itself somewhere in her chest and refused to sit quietly. She parked outside a tall glass building in the financial district and sat in her truck for a moment, looking up at it. This was his world. Clean lines, controlled environments, money expressed through architecture. Everything her small mountain life was not. A man she didn't recognize was waiting at the entrance. He led her up to the 14th floor without small talk. The elevator opened into a wide office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Daniel was already there, standing with his back to the door, looking out at Denver spread below him. He turned when she came in. He looked like himself again. Dark suit, that expensive watch, posture straight despite the ribs that were still clearly bothering him. Ryan stood near the far wall with a tablet in his hand, and a younger man Emma hadn't seen before sat at a side table with 2 laptops open in front of him. "Emma," Daniel said, "thank you for coming." "You said it was important," she replied. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He sat across from her, and for a moment the office felt too large for the kind of conversation that was about to happen. He opened a drawer and slid an envelope across the desk. Emma looked at it but didn't pick it up. "What is that?" Compensation, he said, for the cabin, the food, the risk you took bringing in a stranger. She looked at the envelope for another second, then pushed it back across the desk toward him. Daniel watched her do it. I didn't help you because I expected payment, she said. I know that, he said. That's exactly why I'm offering it. Then you understand why I'm refusing it. He leaned back slightly. Ryan, across the room, had gone very still in the way people go still when they're watching something they didn't predict. Emma folded her hands on her lap. You told me yesterday morning that you're trying to dismantle the parts of your operation that can't be fixed, that you've spent 8 months gathering evidence, that people have been hurt. She paused. An envelope of money doesn't match the size of what you're describing. Daniel said nothing. If you actually want to do something real, Emma continued, then do something real. Don't hand me an envelope and call the debt settled. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Daniel said, What would real look like to you? Emma hadn't planned to have this conversation. She had come downtown expecting a polite goodbye and a check she would refuse. But something about the way he asked the question, directly, without deflection, pulled an honest answer out of her. You said you have legitimate businesses, she said. Multiple ones. Use them. There are communities around that mountain region that have been struggling for years. Good people who need job training, small business support, somewhere their kids can go after school that isn't the street. You have resources and you have connections. She met his eyes. Stop letting money be the answer to everything and let it actually build something instead. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ryan. Ryan raised his eyebrows slightly, not disagreeing, just acknowledging that this was not how these meetings usually went. You'd be willing to help organize something like that? Daniel asked. Emma blinked. That's not what I'm serious, he said. I know how to move money and resources. I don't know how to talk to people the way you do. I watched you 2 days in that cabin, and you have a way of making people feel like they matter without even trying. He paused. I need someone like that. Someone who doesn't want anything from me. Emma sat with that for a moment. I run a bakery, she said. Part-time, Daniel said. The other part I'm asking you to consider. Consider what exactly? Consulting. Helping design and oversee community programs funded through 3 of my legitimate holding companies. You set the terms. You approve every project. If I step out of line, you walk away and I won't argue it. Emma looked at him carefully. She was trying to find the angle, the part where this benefited him in some way that hadn't been said yet. But she couldn't find it, which either meant it wasn't there or it was buried so deep she couldn't see it from where she was sitting. Why does this matter to you? She asked. The real reason. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Because I grew up in one of those struggling communities, and the only person who ever offered me a way out was offering me the wrong door. He looked out the window at the city. I walked through it anyway. I've been trying to figure out how to close it behind me ever since. Emma exhaled slowly. She looked at the envelope still sitting on the desk between them. Put that away, she said. He did. I'll give you 3 months, she said. I'll help you build the framework for 2 programs. After that, we evaluate whether it's working and whether you're serious. She stood up. And Daniel, if this turns out to be something else dressed up as good intentions, I will make a great deal of noise about it. He stood as well. I'd expect nothing less. She picked up her coat and walked toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard Ryan say something quietly to Daniel. Daniel's response was just 2 words, I know. Chicago in February felt like punishment. Daniel had been in the city for 3 days before Emma got the call from Ryan asking her to join them. She had driven to Denver Airport in the early morning dark, boarded a flight she hadn't planned for, and arrived at a downtown hotel to find Daniel, Ryan, and the quiet young man from the Denver office, Ethan Reed, sitting around a room service table covered in printed spreadsheets. Nobody looked like they had slept much. Emma set her bag down and looked at the papers spread across the table. Numbers, account names, transaction dates, columns that ran longer than she had patience to follow. "What am I looking at?" she asked. Ethan looked up. He was younger than she had expected when she finally got a proper look at him. Late 20s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of careful, precise energy that belonged in a university library. He slid one sheet toward her and pointed to a column halfway down the page. "These are withdrawals from 3 separate holding accounts," he said. "All authorized under Daniel's signature. Except Daniel never signed them." Emma looked at Daniel. "Someone forged my authorization," Daniel said. He was standing near the window, coffee in hand, tie loosened. 14 transactions over 11 months. The money went into shell accounts that route back to 2 men who have been part of my operation for over a decade. "How much?" Emma asked. Ethan said a number quietly. Emma set the paper down. "That's not stealing," she said. "That's building something parallel." "Yes," Daniel said. "That's exactly what it is." The 2 men in question were named Marcus Webb and Greg Solano. Daniel explained them briefly. Webb handled distribution networks across 3 Midwest states. Solano managed relationships with suppliers. Both had been in place long enough to know exactly which parts of the operation could run without Daniel's direct involvement. They had been running those parts for themselves, quietly and patiently, for nearly a year. When Ethan had first brought the discrepancies to Daniel 6 weeks earlier, they had agreed to say nothing and keep collecting evidence. The plan was to build an airtight case before making any move. But something had shifted in the last week. A supplier in St. Louis had pulled out of a legitimate contract with Daniel's holding company with no explanation. A warehouse lease in Nashville had been quietly transferred to a company name Ethan didn't recognize until he traced it back 2 layers. And 2 of Daniel's longtime managers had stopped returning calls. "They know something is coming," Ryan said from the couch. He had been quiet since Emma arrived, scrolling through his phone. "They don't know exactly what, but they're moving." "Moving how?" Emma asked. "Cutting ties before Daniel can cut them first. And talking." Ryan set his phone down. "Word is going around that Daniel has gone soft, that he's distracted, that the operation is weakening from the top." Emma looked at Daniel. "Is that hurting you?" "It's hurting the legitimate businesses," Daniel said. 3 investors pulled out of a property development deal yesterday. Someone got to them with a version of events that made our company look unstable. "So they're not just stealing," Emma said. "They're trying to replace you. They're trying to make themselves necessary while making me look unnecessary," Daniel said. 2 different things, but the same result. Ethan adjusted his glasses and pulled another sheet from the pile. "There's something else." Everyone looked at him. He was quiet for a second in the way people are quiet when they're about to say something they've been hoping they wouldn't have to say. "One of the forged authorizations wasn't just for a withdrawal," Ethan said. "It was a transfer of ownership for a property in Denver, a commercial building." He slid the paper across to Daniel. "This building." Daniel looked at the page. His expression didn't break, but something behind his eyes went very cold. Emma looked at the address on the paper. It took her a second. Then she recognized it. It was the building 2 doors down from Clover and Crumb. The exact property she had told Daniel about in the cabin. The one she had described as perfect for expansion. The one she had been quietly dreaming about for 4 years. The room was silent. Emma stood very still. "They were listening to your calls," she said. "Apparently for longer than I realized," Daniel said. His voice was completely level, but the knuckle of his right hand was white where he was gripping the coffee cup. "They transferred that property to make a point," Ryan said. "They know about Emma. They know she matters to the plan. This is a message." Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. She thought about her small bakery, the flour-dusted counters, the early mornings, the 4 years she had poured into that space. And she thought about how easily someone had just reached into the edges of her life without ever having met her. She picked up her coat from the chair. "Where are you going?" Ryan asked. "I'm getting coffee," she said. "Real coffee, not this." She gestured at the hotel pot. "And then I'm coming back, and we're going to figure out how to take that property back, how to remove these two men from every corner of your operation, and how to make sure they never have leverage over anything again." She looked at Daniel. "You said you needed someone who doesn't want anything from you," she said. "I still don't want anything from you, but they just made it personal, so I'm in, fully." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he set his coffee cup down and reached for the spreadsheets. "Ethan," he said, "start from the beginning." They moved fast after Chicago. Daniel booked 4 separate flights out of O'Hare to avoid drawing attention, and they reassembled in Denver the following morning. Emma went home first, checked on the bakery, walked through the space twice, and stood outside for a moment looking 2 doors down at the building with the new ownership sign in the window. It hadn't been there last week. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a long moment, then went inside, told her assistant manager Grace to hold things down for another week, and packed a bag. The 4 of them, Daniel, Ryan, Ethan, and Emma, left Denver by car the next morning. Daniel had decided that flying between cities created a trail that was too easy to follow right now. So they drove. A rented black SUV, nothing distinctive, heading east on I-70 as the Colorado flatlands opened up around them. Emma sat in the back with Ethan, who had his laptops open before they even cleared the city limits. Ryan drove. Daniel sat passenger, watching the road. The first stop was St. Louis. The supplier who had pulled out of the Nashville contract, a man named Carver who ran a mid-sized logistics company, had done so because someone had told him Daniel's organization was under investigation and that any association would bring scrutiny to his own business. It was a lie, but it had been delivered convincingly enough that Carver had walked away from a signed agreement without looking back. Daniel wanted to meet him in person. Emma had suggested it, actually. Back in the Chicago hotel room, she had said that a letter or a phone call would confirm every fear Carver already had about dealing with people like Daniel. A face-to-face meeting in a neutral place was different, harder to dismiss. They met Carver at a diner near the riverfront on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma had asked to come inside. Daniel had hesitated, then agreed. She watched him handle the meeting carefully. He was direct without being aggressive, honest about the disruption inside his organization without revealing specifics, and clear about what the legitimate business side of his work looked like, separate from everything else. Carver was skeptical for the first 20 minutes. Then something shifted. Emma leaned forward and said simply, "He drove from Denver to tell you the truth in person. That's not what someone running from something does." Carver looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at her. By the end of the meeting, the contract was back on the table, pending a revised timeline. Outside on the sidewalk, Ryan looked at Emma with something close to respect. She shrugged. People trust people. They don't trust representatives. They reached Nashville by Thursday. The warehouse situation was more complicated. The lease transfer had been structured through 2 intermediary companies, both registered in states with loose filing requirements. Ethan had been unraveling it from the back seat for 2 days and had finally found the thread that connected it cleanly back to Solano. But there was something else in Nashville. A woman named Patricia ran a small job placement nonprofit out of a converted laundromat in the east part of the city. She had received funding for 2 years from one of Daniel's legitimate holding companies. A grant program that Daniel had set up quietly and that almost nobody in his organization knew about. When the internal chaos started, the payments had been interrupted. Patricia had no idea who was actually funding her. She just knew the money had stopped. Ethan found her name in the financial records and mentioned it almost as an aside. Something administrative to clean up later. Emma told him to find her address. They went to see her the next morning. Patricia was in her 60s, practical and direct, with the particular kind of exhausted dignity that comes from doing important work without enough support for too long. She was polite when Daniel introduced himself, but clearly had no idea who he was or why he was there. He told her the payments had been interrupted by an internal error and would resume within the week, plus the missed months. Patricia looked at him steadily. "Why did you set this up in the first place?" she asked. "Most corporate donors want their name on something." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I didn't need the credit." Patricia studied him. She wasn't someone who accepted things at face value. Emma could see that immediately. "What do you need?" Patricia asked him. "Right now? Nothing," Daniel said. "Later, maybe advice on how to set up 2 more programs that actually work instead of just looking good on paper." Patricia tilted her head slightly. Then she looked at Emma. "Is he serious?" "He drove from Denver," Emma said. Patricia almost smiled. "Come back tomorrow morning. I'll show you what we do here, and you can tell me what you're actually trying to build." They stayed an extra day. Emma spent most of it sitting with Patricia, listening to how the program worked, what the gaps were, where money got wasted, and where it actually changed things. She took notes. Real ones, not the polite notes people take when they're pretending to pay attention. That evening, the 4 of them ate at a small restaurant near the hotel. It was the first meal that didn't feel like a working meeting. Daniel watched Emma describe something Patricia had said, using her hands the way she did when something interested her genuinely. Ryan noticed Daniel watching. He said nothing about it. But later, walking back to the hotel, he fell into step beside Ethan and said quietly, "She's changing the shape of this whole thing." Ethan pushed his glasses up. "Is that a problem?" Ryan thought about it for a half a block. "No," he said. "I think it might be the point." New York arrived like a verdict. Daniel had been preparing for this moment for 8 months. Every forged document, every traced transaction, every quiet conversation in back offices and borrowed conference rooms had been building toward what was about to happen in a midtown Manhattan boardroom on a gray Wednesday morning. Emma had flown in the night before. She wasn't supposed to be part of this meeting. Daniel hadn't asked her to come. She had booked the flight herself and texted Ryan the hotel name. Ryan had texted back one word, "Good." She met them in the hotel lobby at 7 in the morning. Daniel looked at her when she walked in and didn't ask why she was there. He just handed her a coffee and turned back to the documents spread across the lobby table. Ethan had been up all night finalizing the evidence package, 14 months of financial records, forged authorizations, shell company registrations, recorded conversations, and a signed statement from a mid-level manager who had decided that loyalty to Marcus Webb wasn't worth the weight of it anymore. It was thorough. It was clean. It was the kind of documentation that left very little room for argument. The meeting was called under the pretense of a quarterly review. Webb and Solano both attended, which told Daniel they still didn't know exactly what was coming. They thought they were managing him. They arrived confident, which was a mistake. Emma waited in a coffee shop across the street. She sat at a window table with her notebook and watched the building entrance. Ryan had given her a simple update system. One message when it started, one when it ended. She ordered a second coffee she didn't need and wrote notes for the community program framework she and Patricia had been developing over email since Nashville. The first message came at 9:14. Started. She kept writing. The second message came at 11:40. Done. Coming out. She was already pulling on her coat. Daniel came through the revolving door first, Ryan behind him. Ethan last, carrying a bag that was noticeably lighter than when he'd gone in. Emma fell into step beside Daniel without asking how it went. She could read it on his face. Not triumph. Something more complicated and considerably heavier than that. They walked half a block before he spoke. Webb tried to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, Daniel said. Solano didn't say much. When Ethan put the documentation on the table, they both went quiet. And after quiet, Emma asked, "Webb told me I was making the biggest mistake of my career, that without the full operation behind me I was nothing." Daniel paused. He said it like he expected it to land. "Did it?" Daniel looked at the sidewalk for a moment. It landed, he said, just not the way he intended. Both men had been removed from every position within Daniel's legitimate businesses, effective immediately. The evidence package had been structured to give Daniel legal cover. Ethan had worked with a lawyer quietly for the past 3 weeks on exactly how the documentation should be filed and where. Within 48 hours of the meeting, 9 other senior figures across the organization made their own quiet exits. Some because they were connected to Webb and Solano and knew the ground was shifting. Others because they had spent years reading Daniel's silence as permission, and now that permission had been clearly withdrawn. The legitimate businesses held. The questionable operations, the ones Daniel had been planning to close, were formally wound down over the following 10 days through a process Ethan had designed specifically to minimize exposure. By the end of the second week in New York, it was done, and Daniel was almost completely alone. He told Emma this without drama on a Thursday evening in the hotel bar. Ryan was there, Ethan was there, 3 other people out of an organization that had once moved across 7 states. "How does that feel?" Emma asked. Daniel looked at his glass. "Quiet," he said. "Mostly quiet. Is quiet bad?" He thought about it. "I've had people around me for 20 years who I couldn't trust. Rooms full of them. Every meeting, every dinner, every conversation with an agenda underneath it." He turned the glass slowly on the bar. "This is the first time in a long time that the people in the room are actually the people in the room." Ryan looked at the ceiling briefly. Ethan appeared to find something very interesting on his phone. Emma said nothing. Sometimes things didn't need a response. But 2 days later, the weight of it caught up with Daniel in a way that surprised her. She found him early in the morning sitting in the hotel corridor outside his room. Just sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, jacket off, looking at nothing in particular. She sat down on the floor beside him without saying anything. After a long while he said, "I keep thinking about the people at the bottom of all of this. The ones who were just working, who had nothing to do with Webb or Solano or any of it." He paused. "Some of them lost income this week because I shut things down. I know why I had to, but knowing why doesn't make it clean." Emma thought about Patricia in Nashville, about Carver in St. Louis, about the people she hadn't met yet who were connected to the edges of all of this. "Then that's the next part," she said. "You know their names. You know where the gaps are, so we fill them." Daniel turned his head and looked at her. She was sitting cross-legged on a hotel corridor floor in her socks, completely matter-of-fact. Something in his face shifted. The heaviness didn't disappear, but it moved slightly, made room for something else. "You're very strange," he said. "I know," she said. "Come on." Ethan found a breakfast place 2 blocks over. She stood up and handed him his jacket. He took it. Spring came late to the Colorado mountains that year. The snow held through most of March, retreating slowly up the hillsides as April arrived. The roads cleared properly. The light changed. The kind of cold that had felt permanent all winter began to soften at the edges, and people started showing up at Clover and Crumb earlier in the mornings, staying longer, sitting at the 2 small tables by the window, like they were relearning how to be unhurried. Emma noticed all of it because she was back behind her own counter. And being back felt different than it used to. Something had shifted in her while she was away. She couldn't point to a single moment. It had happened gradually, the way water finds new paths through rock, slowly, quietly, without announcing itself. She moved through the bakery with the same hands and the same recipes, but with a wider sense of what those things were connected to. Grace had kept the place running well. Emma told her so directly and meant it. The first community program launched in mid-April. It was a job skills training partnership between 2 of Daniel's legitimate holding companies and a technical college 30 miles from the mountain town. Patricia had helped design the curriculum framework from Nashville over 3 months of phone calls and shared documents. The first cohort was 18 people. mostly adults between 25 and 45 who had been out of stable work for extended periods. Emma had driven the partnership agreements between the college and the holding companies herself. She had sat in meetings with administrators who were skeptical and explained the structure carefully and answered every question without impatience. When one administrator had asked directly about the source of funding and whether there were any strings attached, Emma had looked her in the eye and said there were two conditions. The program reported outcomes honestly, good or bad, and no participant was ever turned away for inability to cover program fees. The administrator had signed within the week. Daniel was not at any of these meetings. That had been Emma's condition from the beginning, and he had agreed to it without argument. His name was not on the program materials. His companies were listed as funding partners under their registered business names, which were clean and unremarkable. Nobody attending job skills training in a mountain town needed to know the full history of where the money had come from. What they needed was the training. But Daniel was present in other ways. He had bought the building 2 doors down from Clover and Crumb, not through a holding company, in his own name. He had untangled the fraudulent transfer Solano had arranged, worked through the legal process Ethan guided him through, and when the property was free, he had purchased it directly and transferred the deed to Emma. She had found out on a Tuesday morning when a lawyer's assistant called the bakery, asking if she was available to sign paperwork. Emma had stood behind the counter with the phone against her ear for a full 15 seconds before she said anything. When she called Daniel afterward, he answered on the second ring. "You should have told me you were doing that," she said. "You would have argued," he said. "I still might." "The deed is in your name," he said. "It's yours. Do whatever you want with it." She had stood in the empty building the following afternoon, walking through the space slowly. High ceilings, good bones, large front windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole room glow. She stood in the center of it for a long time with her arms folded, turning slowly. The cafe's side would go here, the seating along that wall, the event space in the back room, which was larger than she had imagined from the outside. She took photographs on her phone and sent them to Grace with no message. Grace sent back 3 exclamation marks. Through April and into May, the renovation began. Emma managed it herself with a local contractor she trusted. Daniel had provided the funds, but the decisions were entirely hers. Layout, materials, colors, fixtures. Every choice she made was something she had been quietly thinking about for 4 years without having anywhere to put the thoughts. Daniel visited the mountain town twice during this period. Both times he arrived without fanfare, parked down the street, and came in through the bakery's side entrance. He would sit at the small table in the back kitchen with a coffee while Emma worked, and they would talk about the program cohorts, about Patricia's expansion plans in Nashville, about Ethan, who had quietly started a financial consulting firm of his own and was building something legitimate from the ground up, about Ryan, who had relocated to Denver and was managing the legitimate property portfolio with a steadiness that surprised even himself, about the people who had lost work when the operations closed, several of whom had been connected to the new job skills program through a referral process Emma had built into the intake system. During the second visit, Daniel helped sand the new shelving in the expanded space for 2 hours without being asked. He was not particularly skilled at it, but he was patient, and he didn't quit until it was done. Emma handed him a piece of coffee cake afterward. He ate it standing at the window, looking out at the mountain road. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," he said. "You say that every time," Emma said. "It's true every time," she laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. Daniel looked at her for a moment, then back at the window. Outside the afternoon light was long and gold across the hillside. The snow was completely gone now. The trees were green. A couple walked past on the sidewalk below, unhurried, a dog pulling at the leash between them. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Daniel Brooks had nowhere else he needed to be. The morning of the grand opening, Emma burned the first batch of cinnamon rolls. Not badly, just enough that the edges came out darker than she wanted. She stood at the oven looking at them for a moment, then slid them onto the cooling rack anyway. Grace walked past, glanced at them, and said nothing because she was wise enough to know that this was not a morning for opinions about cinnamon rolls. Emma had been at the bakery since 4. She told herself it was because there was a lot to prepare. That was true, but the real reason was that she needed the familiar rhythm of it, the flour, the timers, the particular smell of the oven warming up in a dark and quiet kitchen. It settled something in her that nothing else quite reached. By 8 o'clock, the expanded space was ready. The cafe side looked exactly the way she had pictured it standing in that empty building 4 months ago. Warm wood tables, mismatched chairs that somehow worked together. The afternoon light already promising through the large front windows even at this hour. The event space in the back had been set with extra seating for the opening. Local wildflowers in small jars on every table. A chalkboard menu on the wall in Grace's handwriting, which was considerably better than Emma's. People started arriving at 9. Not a trickle. A steady flow from the first minute, which caught Emma off guard, even though she had hoped for exactly this. Familiar faces from the mountain town, people she had been serving for years who walked in and stopped in the doorway and looked around with the particular expression of people discovering that something they already loved had become more than they expected. Ryan arrived at 9:30 with Ethan, who was wearing a jacket that suggested someone had advised him on the occasion. They sat at a window table, and Ryan ordered 3 things from the menu within the first 5 minutes, which made Grace laugh. Patricia came from Nashville. Emma hadn't known she was coming until she walked through the door. She had taken a morning flight and arrived with a small wrapped package, and the unhurried calm of someone who had decided this was worth the trip. Emma hugged her in the middle of the cafe without caring who was watching. "You built something real," Patricia said quietly, looking around the room. "We built something real," Emma said. Patricia raised an eyebrow at the "we" but said nothing about it. By 10 o'clock, the event space in the back was full. Emma had planned a short, informal gathering, just a chance for people connected to the job, skills program, and the community partnerships to meet each other in one room. Several graduates from the first program cohort were there. 2 of them had been hired by local businesses in the past month. One woman named Dara had opened a small alterations shop 2 streets over and had brought business cards to hand out, which she did with a directness that made Emma genuinely happy. Emma said a few words to the room. She kept it short because long speeches in small rooms made her uncomfortable, and she suspected they made everyone else uncomfortable too. She thanked Grace. She thanked Patricia. She thanked everyone who had shown up for the program when it was new and unproven and easier to ignore. She did not mention Daniel by name. He was standing near the back of the room. He had arrived quietly, which was apparently the only way he knew how to arrive anywhere now. No convoy, no Ryan at his shoulder scanning the room. Just a man in a dark jacket standing near the back wall with a coffee cup listening. Emma caught his eye once during her remarks. He gave her the smallest nod. After the room opened up into conversation, Emma made her way to where he was standing. "You came," she said. "You didn't think I would?" "I wasn't sure." He looked around the room. At Patricia talking to Dara. At Ryan attempting to explain something to Ethan using a napkin sketch. At the first cohort graduates talking to each other with the easy familiarity of people who had been through something together. "How does it feel?" Emma asked. It was the same question she had asked him in a New York hotel bar 4 months ago. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Like something that will still be here after I leave the room." Emma looked at him. "That's the difference," he said. "Everything I built before required me to be present or it stopped. Fear only works while the person causing it is visible." He paused. "This keeps going on its own. That's the point. Emma said. I know that now. They stood together for a while without needing to fill the silence. Outside the front windows, the mountain road was busy for a Saturday morning. Cars parked along both sides of the street, people walking in pairs and small groups toward the bakery. A line had formed at the counter that Grace was managing with complete competence and visible enjoyment. Clover and Crumb was full. The expansion was full. Something Emma had carried quietly as a private hope for 4 years had become. A physical place where people were sitting and talking and eating cinnamon rolls with slightly dark edges. Daniel set his empty coffee cup down on a nearby table. I should let you get back to it, he said. You could stay, Emma said, simply, without pressure. He looked at her for a moment. Outside, someone opened the front door and the sound of the full cafe came through. Voices, laughter, the particular warm noise of a room where people are comfortable. Daniel picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, then looked at Emma. I think I will, he said. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Daniel Brooks stayed.